Hey, everybody. One of the best attributes that any of us could have in the pursuit of a goal is consistency. That applies to many things: our work, parenting, the pursuit of a personal health goal. And that consistency is a key attribute to what makes Mario Fraioli tick. Mario is a well known running coach, podcaster, and author, and he knows what consistency can do in helping his clients to achieve new things, and he backs it up with his own actions. Mario is the author of a newsletter called the Morning Shakeout that he publishes every week, and he's published for more than 500 weeks in a row, which is coming up on 10 years without missing a week. Today, we talk about the influences of his growing up in Massachusetts, things like the Boston Marathon and certain coaches that sparked a love for running, and also the joy of helping people to reach their goals. This one is not just about running, but you might want to lace up your shoes after this one with Mario Fraioli. I think we're good to rock and roll. So are you in the Bay Area? Is that right?
I am in the Bay Area. I'm in
Yeah.
Novato, California, which is just about 30 miles north of San Francisco.
Okay. And you've been in California a long time, but you grew up back east. You're a Massachusetts guy, right? So what's your relationship just with the Boston Marathon? I guess I'd start with that, since you're a runner, you grew up around that. Does that have a special place for you?
Absolutely. I grew up with the Boston Marathon before I even had an appreciation for what it was. I grew up in central Massachusetts in a small town called Auburn, which is next to the city of Worcester. And the Boston Marathon has been around for a long time at this
Mhm.
point. And in Massachusetts, it happens on Patriots Day, which is a holiday. So school was closed. So I always appreciated the Boston Marathon, even before I had an interest in running, because I didn't have to go to school. And as it was, the race was broadcast on channels 4, 5, 7, 10, and my mom would watch it every year. And she was not a runner. She was not a running fan, but she always watched the Boston Marathon. And
Yeah.
so I would join her from time to time in watching it. And I still remember a lot of those names. And this is before I even followed the sport, but I remember names like Moses Tanui and Cosmas Ndedi and Catherine Nareba. And you would
Mm.
hear about Bill Rogers and
Uh-huh.
all of these legends of the sport. And I remember those from, I mean, it had to have been the early mid 1990s before I even started running competitively myself. So big part of my life. And then eventually I did get into running, and I ran the Boston Marathon for the first time in 2007. And if you grew up in Massachusetts or live in Massachusetts and someone knows that you're a runner, one of the first questions you will probably be asked is, have you run Boston, or have you
Sure.
run the marathon?
Yeah.
And uh, it's a point of pride for me to be able to say at this stage, I have run it 6 times. So yeah,
Yeah.
very important race to me, something I grew up with. And I don't know if I'll ever do another one, which is a whole nother conversation. I've done it 6 times, but
Uh-huh.
it is my hometown race for all intents and purposes.
Yeah, it's a very special race, and I've done it a number of times, and I ran it in 2014,
Okay.
the year after the bombing,
Mhm.
which it's already very patriotic, but it was especially patriotic, because of the Boston Strong movement, and just people wanting to come out and support it and reclaim that, right,
Mhm.
for the city, for the state, and for the sport. And it was a beautiful day. It was one of my most memorable runs. I mean, just the people are great to begin with, but you add on that element to bounce back from that tragedy of 2013. It's a special place. So when I first ran it, I was like, I'm going to run it because it's a thing to do. I didn't really know what the big deal was around it, and now I understand it. It is a cool event, and because of the people, I think the people there really make it special.
So it's the oldest annual marathon in the world. And the route has more or less been the same for as long as it's been in existence. It's changed a little bit. It used to be shorter than 26.2 miles in the very early years. And then they brought the start line out to Hopkinton, and the finish line, has moved by, maybe a couple feet here and there over the years, but it's largely remained the same. And most of the course is small towns. You're only in
Yeah.
Boston
I
for a
know.
handful of miles at the
Yeah.
very end. And in a lot of those small towns, a lot of families have been there for decades, if not longer
Yeah.
than that. And it is a tradition to put your chairs out a day or two before the race and line the course. And that is what you do on Monday. Again, all the schools are closed. It's a
Yeah.
holiday. It's hard to get around otherwise. And that's the thing to do. And people come out for it every year, even if they're not runners. And that's one of my favorite things about the Boston Marathon. It doesn't matter who you are, where you're from, how fast you're going. If you're out there, you are being cheered for the entire way. And that's a really special thing. And
Yeah. It's
and the
cool.
fans of Boston, I mean, I think because of the history of it, they know Boston Billy. They know the best runners in the world come there every year. They know it's a big deal to qualify. I mean, the fans go nuts. I mean, they absolutely go nuts. And I've run the New York City Marathon. I've run other big marathons, small marathons. There's not, I mean, I'm biased. I grew up there, so take it for what it's worth, but there's nothing else quite like it.
Yeah. And you talk about the small towns too. That's a great point because that's one thing that I remember about it is you're running through, I mean, there's like these brick firehouses and brick,
Mhm.
buildings. Like you're running through all these small towns and kids are out there handing out orange slices and there's pretty much people all the way. And then as you get closer to the city, right, there's more people. You go past
Mhm.
Boston College and all the college kids are out there and they've been drinking and hooting it up. And then as you get into the city, right, you see the sign and you head in. It is a magical thing. And so, what was the foundation for you? What was the hook for you in running? Then was it? Did you just get into it in junior high and high school? What pulled you in?
Basketball. I
Really?
mean,
Yeah.
I went to basketball camp every summer as a kid. That was my sport. I was obsessed with the game. And I'm not as obsessed anymore, and I definitely do not play nearly as much as I did when I was a kid, but that was my first love.
Mhm.
And I brought a basketball with me everywhere that I went to school. I had one in my locker. I slept with one in my bed. I'm not ashamed to admit that
Yeah.
because that's
Yeah.
what Pistol Pete Maravich did. He was my hero. I watch all his videos. I mean, my dad's kitchen still to this day, the tile is warped because I would dribble my basketball around the kitchen and you could see exactly where that was. And so I went to basketball camp every summer. And my mom at the time worked at Clark University, which is in Worcester, Massachusetts, and it's a Division III school. The coach there was a guy named Paul Phillips, really good guy, great coach, built an awesome program, and he had this incredible summer camp that I got to go to for free because my mom worked at Clark University, and I met a guy there named Jim White, and he was my coach that year. This was going into my junior year of high school. And he said to me, if you really want to get a leg up on everyone for the basketball season this winter, you need to run cross country. I did it in high school. All my teammates did it in high school. There is no better conditioning for the winter basketball season than to run cross country in the fall. And I just said, I'll do whatever you tell me to do.
Yeah.
So I signed up for cross country that fall with the only intention to get myself in great shape for the basketball season that winter. And my first race, which was at Grafton High School, I remember it like it was yesterday, another small town in central Massachusetts. The course was 2.6 miles and it started and finished on their high school track. And what was interesting, I didn't know this until probably later that year or the next year, but we ran a lot of our dual meets on the roads. We might finish on a grass field
Yeah.
or on the track, but we largely ran these road races, even though it was supposed to be cross country, which is
Right.
typically run on trails and dirt and grass, etc. And I just went out like a bat out of hell because I didn't know any better. And I ended up winning the race. And it was like a drug. I couldn't get enough of it. I was like, this is cool. I've never won anything in my entire life. And it was very different than basketball because it was just me. Like I was on the cross country team, but we didn't have a team strategy, didn't have to pass the ball to anybody. There was no playbook. It was just me against the other kids that I was racing against in this course that I hadn't seen previously. And I would hit hills that I didn't even know were there. And I mean, I probably couldn't have run more than 2 miles in practice before
Wow.
that race. So I was largely going into the unknown and I loved it. I just really, really loved it. and I still love it to this day. And that was 1998. So here we are 27 years later. And that is still intoxicating to me. Not just the winning part, but just the me against myself and me being responsible for my destiny on that day and seeing these courses and the exploratory aspect of it and pushing myself and understanding when I need to back off and putting myself into a hole and seeing if I can dig myself out of it. I mean, I didn't know these things at the time when it was happening. I could feel them. But as I've had time to process this over the last, near 3 decades, that captured me from that first race, and it's just continued to snowball from there over the last 27 or so years.
That's an awesome story. So did you say that was your junior year? Your junior
That
year
was
of
go
cross country?
that was going that was my junior year of high school, correct?
Junior
Yeah,
years
that
of
was
high
my junior.
school. So you
Yeah.
run cross country, you get the bug junior, senior year. You obviously were pretty good because did that lead to a scholarship? Because you went on to run at a D2 school in Stony Brook
Stonehill College
or
in northeastern
Stonehill. Is that what it is?
Massachusetts. Yeah,
Yeah.
Stony Brook is a school. It's
Yeah.
D3, I believe, in New
Yeah. It's
York. Might have to fact check me on that, but uh, not exactly. So what happened is that junior year, I ran the entire season, and we really didn't have a great cross country program at my school. The janitor, a guy named Jim Gagne, who I'm still in contact with to this day, really nice guy. And I think he would tell you this too. He was not really a coach. Like nominally, he was the coach, but he was a recreational runner. He was the custodian at the school, and he picked up, an extra couple grand for coaching the cross country team, which at the time we had 6 guys most of
yeah.
the time. Some of the time, some meets we didn't even have enough to score, and we didn't really train, and I didn't really know that at the time. We would race twice a week against other schools. Usually on the days in between, we wouldn't run because we didn't want to get tired. We definitely did not run on the weekends. I love the racing aspect of it, and that's kind of all that we really did.
Yeah.
And fast forward to the end of that season, um, we had the Central Massachusetts district meet, and I can't remember exactly how it shook out, but I think the top 2 teams would qualify for the state championship the following week, and then the top, I believe it was 5 individuals, not on the top 2 teams, would qualify for the state championship the next week. I was the 6th individual. I missed by 1 spot, and
Hmm.
that really lit a fire under my butt because honestly, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't really understand the significance of it. And I was like, man, I could probably be pretty good at this if I actually trained and knew how to train. And I didn't know this at the time either, but that sort of set me down this path of what eventually became coaching because
Hmm.
I started self teaching myself how to train. So I actually ran the summer going into my senior year, and this is again 1999, so the internet isn't what it wasn't what it is now, but
Hmm.
you could still find stuff online, and I would print out the training schedules of guys like Bob Kennedy and Nordine Morcelli and Dina Drossen at the time, whatever I could find, Joan Benoit Samuelson. I would take out books from the library, get my hands on whatever running books I could, and I really looked for the ones that had the training schedules in there, which looked nothing like I was doing. And so I started putting some of that together for myself. And I trained that summer going into my senior year. I met a couple guys from the next town over who did have a really good team and knew what it was like to train in the summer and started running a bit with them. And one of those guys, Sean McEwen, is still my best friend to this day. Ended up going to college together. We're in each other's weddings. Um, you know, Cross country is really what brought us together. But I had a great senior year. I was winning races left and right, and I did qualify for the state championship that year, and I finished 7th in the state of Massachusetts my senior year,
All right.
which I hadn't even qualified
Yeah.
the year before. And colleges did start to take interest during my senior year, but I wasn't that good. Like we had guys in the state, Andy Powell, Tristan Colangelo, Saeed Ahmed, who were national class, ended up
Mm.
going to Arkansas and Princeton. And where did Andy go? He coaches at the University of Washington now. Did he
Oh,
go to
what
Oregon?
Powell?
I
Did
can't
you say
remember. Yeah,
Powell?
and Andy
Yeah,
Powell, he's the
yeah.
coach at Washington, and
He and his wife, his son
yeah,
Owen. Yeah, so I'm in
is
the Seattle area, so
mhm.
I've seen Owen at state because my daughter runs cross country and track, and so the
Andy
Powell.
was
So
the
that's
man.
interesting connection.
Yeah,
Oh yeah,
he was a 406 miler at Oliver Ames High School in northeastern
yeah,
Massachusetts, where eventually I went to college. But I
yeah.
mean, so I was pretty good, but I was nowhere near as good as these guys. But some smaller schools, smaller D1 schools, D2, D3 schools, started taking interest, and I ultimately ended up going to Stonehill College. It's about an hour's drive from my house where I grew up, so it was far enough away, but still close enough that I could get home pretty easily. I liked that it was D2. I knew that I could run there. That was a big thing for me. There were some of the D1 schools that I could go to and I might be able to walk on. Some of the
Right.
D3 schools were really good, but then there were some other ones that, had programs that were barely better than a high school program. So Stonehill felt like a good fit for me, for all of those reasons. And not to jump too far ahead, but I ended up meeting a woman there who, when I went in, she was just coaching women's cross country and men's and women's track and field distances. Her name's Karen Bowen. I had a different coach for cross country my freshman year, and he also coached cross country my sophomore year. But I met Karen that fall because she was coaching the women's team, and we would travel together and we ate together in the dining hall. And I remember I couldn't wait to be coached by her in track. I knew she was going to start coaching me that winter in track, and she was phenomenal. I mean, her women's teams were going to the national championships. She had all Americans, and I just knew that she was a good coach, and I could not wait to run for her. And I got a taste of that later my freshman year when it was track season, and I got a lot faster
Mm,
under her. Ran times that I didn't think I would run as a senior, never mind a freshman in
wow.
college. And long story short, she ended up taking over both programs in their entirety, cross country and track, my junior year. So she was coaching all of us year round at that point. So she coached me for cross country, my junior and senior years of college, and track all 4 years. And I did things as a runner that I never thought I would do going into college, but beyond that, she had a profound impact and still has a profound impact on my life, and is really the main reason that I wanted to become a coach, because I saw how influential that someone in that position could be,
Yeah.
because she believed in me as an athlete, and she told me as a freshman that I could break 4:10 in the mile before I left there. And I was a 4:36 miler going into college. I was like, you're out of your mind. There's no way. I ended up running 4:09. She saw
Wow.
that in me and had that belief the entire way through and helped me to see that through. But beyond that, she showed me how this pursuit of competitive distance running can really parallel any other pursuit in your life. The lessons that you learn on the cross country course, on the track, day to day in training, they translate over into other areas of your life. And it was kind of a light bulb moment for me. And I didn't graduate college and go right into coaching, but someday I want to do this. Like, maybe not at the collegiate level or at the high school level, but I want to help other runners to get that light bulb to go off for them, like Karen did for me. So, um, yeah, that was a, a very long, rambling, winded answer to your question, but
That
that's
is
how it all
great.
came
I
to
mean,
be.
this isn't just a solely running podcast, Mario, as we've talked about, but I love running. I love what it's done for me in my life and the things that you're talking about, right? That charge that it gives you, that, I like to call it the superpower it gives you, the energy it gives you throughout the rest of the day, the goal setting, accomplishing things, doing hard things, which we'll talk more about. So I love it. I could talk about this all day long. And, I appreciate that about you. When you hear like these commencement addresses, they say, find something you're passionate about and find a way to do that for the rest of your life, and not many people can do that. Clearly, you're passionate about running, all things running, and you've turned that into a career through running, through coaching, right? Through writing, podcasting, and whatnot. So, I don't know if that was the intent, but it happened. So how did you come out of, you know, how did you start out in this running world? I think it was through writing, but you tell me.
I've always enjoyed writing. I've liked writing. It's my way of thinking through things. When I have a pen in my hand and I can get these thoughts out of my head onto paper, or do the same thing on my computer from a young age. Even in college, I mean, a big reason that I majored in philosophy is because it was so writing heavy. You wrote papers instead of taking tests. I'd much rather write a paper than take a test.
Mhm.
And so, you know, beyond the running part of it, writing has always just felt like a part of me. I mean, it's just sort of how I think about, like, how I make sense of the world oftentimes is through my writing. And I do that every week now through my newsletter, but I started doing that very early on. I mean, I've always kept journals, and I still keep handwritten journals, and that's a very like integral part of my life. But when I went to college, I knew that I wanted to run. I mean, I joked that I majored in cross country and I minored in track. Um, I just loved running, and I knew that I wanted to continue competitive running after school. And I was pretty good for a D2 runner. I was an All-American in cross country. I qualified for the national championships on the track. And again, much like high school, like I was pretty good, but I wasn't like D1 level
Mhm.
good. I wasn't going to sign a pro contract coming out of school, but I knew that if I worked a little bit harder and I put in some more miles, that I could continue to improve, and maybe to the point where I could qualify for the Olympic trials, or I could become a semi-professional runner. And that was my main focus when I graduated college in 2004. And I actually moved out to Eugene, Oregon, and joined a team out there called Team Eugene Puma, and ran for them for just a couple of months. I ended up moving back home to Massachusetts. It wasn't exactly what I thought it would be, and I honestly wasn't prepared to make that kind of a jump at the time. And I continued to pursue post collegiate competitive running for a few years after that. But I also had to make some money and
Right.
start paying back my student loans. And really, I mean, I knew that I wanted to write at that point, and maybe not even specifically just about running, but sports in general. And I got a job at the Worcester Telegram Gazette, which is my local newspaper. And I started by answering phones in the sports department. And so high school and college coaches would call the desk after in the afternoons or early evenings, and I was one of the guys who answered the phone, and I would take all of the stats and I put together the box score in a little like 2 sentence roundup. And it was the best job I ever had. I loved it. I
Yeah.
loved just like getting this information from a game that I had not attended and turning it into a story that people would read the next day. Another intoxicating feeling for
Yes.
me. I was like, oh, I want to do this. I want to tell these stories. And I mean, that's not a career job at the time. I think it paid $7.25 an hour, something like that. And I also worked in telemarketing at the newspaper so that I could have health insurance and continue again to pay back my student loans. But opportunities started to arise. I got to go cover, local high school games because we just needed people to do that. And the editors took notes. You can actually write. Great. So they started giving me some more assignments. And eventually what happened, this is a crazy story, but we had beat writers for all the major Boston sports teams: Patriots, Bruins, Celtics, Red Sox.
Mhm.
And our Patriots writer is a guy by the name of Ken Powers. The Patriots were at the Super Bowl, and he got called out for plagiarizing Peter King's Sports Illustrated.
Wow.
And they investigated it, and turned out he was plagiarizing Peter King's Sports
Oh
Illustrated column.
boy.
He got called back from the Super Bowl. There was a shuffling of the sports department, and a copy editing position opened up. And what was great about the copy editing position is that it was 30 hours a week versus 16, which is what I was working
Mhm.
before. It paid more than twice as much, and I wouldn't have to answer the phone anymore. I got
Yeah.
to actually put the newspaper together. And so I applied for that job. And really, it came down to a copy editing test and interview. And I scored the highest on the copy editing test. And I got that job. So I had moved up in the newspaper. I never studied journalism formally or anything like that. But
Mhm.
I have always loved newspapers and physical media, and it was cool to be in that environment. And I was in the sports department. I was doing things that I loved. I've loved sports since I was a young kid, and so I got to see how newspapers got put together. And I again, like, just I was really I'm like, I love doing this, and I still got
Yeah.
to cover some games from time to time. I had a high school teammate who was also a college teammate named Tom O'Connell, who ended up signing a an Arena League football contract, which was a big deal for guys from our small town. And I pitched a feature story on him, and the sports editor, Dave Greenslet, said, "You can write the story. I can't promise you that we're going to run it." Long story short, it ended up running on D1, which is the front page of the sports section on Sunday, which is the biggest paper of the week. I did a good job on the story, and that opened up some more opportunities for me. All this time, I was still really into running. I was training hard myself. I ended up picking up some part-time hours at a local running store, and I mean, I got the chance to write about running a little bit at the newspaper. I would cover some high school cross country and or track meets for a short period of time. I wrote the running column for our newspaper. I got to do that, which was once a week, but I really wanted to write more about running. So I started freelancing,
Mhm.
and I was freelancing for what is still my favorite running magazine of all time, even though it no longer exists, called Running Times back in the early
Mhm.
2000s. I
Mhm.
got some stories in there, Runner's World, New England Runner, eventually Triathlete magazine. And I knew even in the early 2000s that someday I want, like, it became clear to me. I'm like, someday I want to coach and I want to write. Those are the two things that I want to do, and I want to do them for myself. I have no idea how that's going to happen, but that is the dream. And not to fast forward through too much, that is largely what I do today. I spend most of my time coaching other athletes, and I write about running through my newsletter, The Morning Shakeout. And I skipped a whole bunch of steps
Yeah, but
in
that
between
that
those two things, but I eventually got there in about 2016, 17.
well, the great so a couple of things I pick up on that is there's little seeds planted along the way,
Hmm.
right?
Yep.
Like Massachusetts, watching the Boston Marathon, just a little seed planted there.
Hmm.
You know, that great coach you had, that feeling of running that you had, and then the feeling of a coach and that coach's impact on your life, right? And then at the newspaper, the little bit of writing and the feeling you got from that, like it all coalesces into what you're doing now, but it didn't happen overnight. And the other observation is you sought chances to better yourself in running, in
Hmm.
writing, right, and in your studying of running journals and programs. You were proactive instead of reactive. I mean, it sounds like maybe it wasn't intentional. You were just passionate about what you were doing. And all of that really led to eventually where this career turned out to be what it is today.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. I've always been that way. When I'm interested in something, I will dive very deep on it. When I'm not
Mhm.
interested in something, and I was this way in school, I paid zero attention to it. So I'm either all in or I'm all out. So if I'm all in on something, I'm going to try to learn as much as I can about a particular topic. And that started in high school with the training side of things because I didn't have a great coach and I knew there was more to it than what I was doing. And I would just read whatever I could get my hands on at the time. And I still do that today. It looks a little bit different now in 2025 than it did in 1998, but that's still what I'm doing today. And I hope I never lose it. If I do, it's time to like move on to something else. But I've always been that way. And, at the time, I had no idea where any of it would lead. And now I can look back over the last 25, 27 years and connect those dots, and see how those seeds that you talked about
Mhm.
have grown in different ways. But I never could have known it at the time. But I always had an idea of sort of where I wanted to go. And I said yes to a lot of things and I explored my interests. And I mean, doing that consistently enough over a long period of time has led me to that place I always thought I wanted to end up. And I never could have really known that, but it's cool to look back and see how that path has kind of formed itself over the course of the last nearly 30 years.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why we love these stories, because I think whether you're into running or whatever you're into, there's a lot to be learned from that. Was it the gig at Competitor magazine that then brought you out to California?
Yes, I moved to California the day after my 28th birthday in 2010 to work for competitor magazines. I'd spent nearly my entire life in Massachusetts, minus those 2 months in Oregon, and moved to California, a place where I had only visited two other times.
Yeah.
One of that was my interview at competitor. And interestingly enough, the only person that I knew in California was my best friend that I had mentioned a little while ago, Sean McEwen, who had moved out in 2005 to work for Reebok as their run specialty rep in that area. So I had shipped my car out early, and he was the guy who picked it up for me. He's the guy who picked me up from the airport when I got out there and sort of showed me the ropes. So he was the only person that I knew, but I couldn't, and that was, in a lot of ways purely coincidence, but I couldn't have had a better landing in California at the time.
And Matt, you worked with Matt Fitzgerald, they're a competitor who we've had on the podcast here,
Mhm.
another running writer. And did you guys work alongside each other?
Literally right next to each other. His desk was next to mine for those first 2 or so years that I was
Yeah,
at competitor, and he eventually moved on to do some other things. And Matt is one of the most widely respected endurance writers ever. I mean,
yeah, yeah,
prolific. I don't know how
yes,
many books he's written at this point, but I know it's at least 30, if not
yes,
more than that. So I got to learn the ropes from Matt, who had and still has a lot more experience than I ever did. And I got to see his process and how he approached things. And I learned a lot just from observing him. And that's something else that I've done my entire life. When I'm around someone who I know knows their stuff or that I respect, I'll just watch. And I learned that from my grandfather. He was just someone who observed, and
yeah,
I learned that power of observation. I did that with Matt. I've done that with coaches that I've been around, that I have taken what I've learned from them and applied to my own practice. Other writers that I've been fortunate to be around, but Matt was one of those people who I was fortunate to get to spend a couple of years working side by side with, because he's one of the best in the business. And there's a reason for that. It's not happenstance. You had him on the podcast and he talked all about it in detail, but that guy has, I
yeah,
mean, to the name of this show, paid his dues.
yeah.
And I got to see what that looked like up close and personal, and have always had and still have a lot of respect for Matt Fitzgerald.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good when talent can feed off talent like that, and clearly you both have done a lot of great things. The coaching side of things, I wanna talk to you about the coaching side of things. So that, was that organic growing out of, out of, demand from other people? Where did that start?
The short answer is yes. So I've always had this interest in training because I didn't have great coaching in high school. So I wanted to see how the best runners train, because I knew what I was doing in high school wasn't it.
Right.
So I went down this path of self discovery, and as I mentioned, in college, I had a great coach in Karen Bowen, and I was the guy in college who basically lived in her office, and I am that annoying guy, and this is probably why I eventually started a podcast, who just asked a lot of questions. And I asked her more questions than she probably cared to answer, but she was very gracious in answering all of them. And she would give me additional reading material. And I learned a lot from her, just about the X's and O's of coaching. But again, like the interpersonal side of coaching, the coach athlete relationship, and how to nourish that over the course of a long period of time. But I've always had this interest in training. I still do. My teammates knew that. So when we graduated in 2004, I was going down this path of trying to pursue professional or semi-professional running. None of my other teammates who are also graduating were, but many of them wanted to continue running competitively after school. And New England has one of the best racing scenes
Mm,
in the entire world. There's a
yeah.
great cross country series, road races of varying distances nearly every weekend of the year. So some of them wanted to do that, train for the first half marathon, run cross country for a local club. And they asked me to write their training schedules for them. I don't even know if you would call it coaching at the time, but they're like, "Hey, you're into this. Would you?" Yes, I would love to do
Yeah.
it. Like they couldn't even they couldn't ask me fast enough. I was like, I would love to do it, and I never got to do that for anyone else before. And again, I don't know if I would call it coaching at the time. They weren't really asking for coaching. They just wanted me to write them a training schedule. So that's what I did. And this is before the days of Training Peaks and Final Surge and
Right.
all these online platforms. Even Google Docs weren't a thing. I would just email them a training schedule every week for
Mhm.
whatever races that they were training for. And I mean, call it coaching if you want. Maybe it wasn't. I don't know. But I started helping other people toward their running goals. And again, another intoxicating feeling that I just couldn't get enough of. I was like, yes, this is what I want to do. Like, this is great. And even I didn't know anything. I knew a little bit about how to put together a training schedule. I didn't know anything about coaching myself at the time, but I mean, I think the best way to learn how to do something is to just throw yourself in the fire and do it. So I wasn't taking any kind of formal coaching classes or courses or getting any kind of mentorship. I eventually would years later, but I like just jumped right into the deep end helping people train for these different races. And I learned a lot just by doing that. I learned what worked from an X's and O's standpoint and what didn't. But I quickly learned that it was more than just writing a good training schedule. It was about the connection that you can make with an athlete, gaining that trust, letting it build over time, and really trying to develop and nourish the relationship side of it. And if you can do that and the training methodology is solid, you can do some pretty incredible things. And I knew very early on, like, this is what I want to do. I don't know what it's going to look like, but this is what I want to do if I can find a way to make it happen.
And I mean, it's really evolved because you, from that, you eventually, I mean, you will train, a novice runner training for the Boston Marathon. I know you've trained some Olympic athletes. I mean, the scale,
The full
um,
spectrum.
right? So
Mhm.
what is the, I guess, what would, as a coach, the high level runners, what's something that they do or don't do that would surprise people, right? That would surprise the common people in the way they approach their whole program.
They don't miss days. That's what it really comes down to.
Mhm.
And it sounds very oversimplified, but the best athletes, they do not miss days. And it doesn't mean that they're running every day. If they have a rest day on their schedule, they take the rest day. But it's not like they go on a streak of, oh, I'm doing really well for like 4 or 5 days, and then I don't run for like, 2 or 3 days, or something gets in the way. I mean, they are committed to the process and they don't miss days. And that really is, certainly from a performance standpoint, the biggest key to success, whether you're world class or you're a competitive age group athlete, is
Mhm.
that consistency is key. And I know that that gets, beat to death, but it's absolutely true. And to me, that is the biggest ingredient to that success, especially for the top athletes. And I think part and parcel with that is they don't make excuses for that. Like, there's just no excuse
Mhm.
for missing a day. They just don't do it because this is an important pursuit to them and they've found a way to prioritize it. Doesn't mean they don't have any other things going on in their life. If they're truly an elite athlete and a professional and it is their job, of course it's easy to prioritize that because that's how you're putting bread on the table. But even the best amateur age group athletes that I've coached, if they're really serious about it and they really want to get good and they have that growth mindset over a long period of time, they don't miss days and they
Yeah.
don't make excuses. And those are the biggest things. I have that conversation with people from time to time. Like, maybe I need to do this workout, or, I'm like, you just need to get consistent first. And then we can start talking
Consistency.
about that other stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
that's really what's going to be the biggest key. Cause again, to the point of this podcast, you got to pay your dues. Like, it
Yeah.
takes time. Like,
Right.
it takes time. Like, distance running is the hardest sport in the entire world, in my opinion.
Mhm.
And you just cannot fake your way through it. Can't. And there's no shortcuts, there's no hacks, there's
Right.
no quick fixes. Like, it just takes consistent work over a long period of time. And that's the truth. A lot of people don't want to hear that. They don't want to commit to it. But the very best, no matter if they're the best in the world or they're the best in your city, they know that to be true
Yeah.
and they live it.
Consistency, right? I mean, that's such a great point. It applies to a lot of things, not just running. It applies to a lot of things. You keep showing up. You do what you said you were going to do. That's what I think the beauty of running is. I've said it on this podcast before. I think a lot of people can run a marathon if they put in the time. They don't get injured. They don't try to take shortcuts. They consistently build up and follow a program. And the reward that comes from that is, the mental and physical gratification of accomplishing something that was difficult, and you benefit from that not just after the race, but all those weeks leading up to the race, right? And it so it that's the metaphor, but it applies to life. I truly believe.
I absolutely agree with that. And for me, consistency is my number one core value, not just with training, but life in general, is to be as consistent as possible in as many areas of life as you can be. And if you can do that over a long period of time, I think you're going to live a pretty great life and you're going to thrive. But that's what's key. I mean, inconsistency, I think, is the biggest killer. And for a number of things like bad training, health,
Yeah.
work, poor work performance, relationships, like you name it. If you're inconsistent in any of those areas, it's probably not going to be a worthwhile thing. But if you're consistent, like you're going to build great relationships, you're going to be a great employee at your job, you're going to get better at it, you're going to become a better runner, you're going to be a better partner to your spouse, a better parent to your kids, if you are consistent day in and day out. But it's as simple and as hard as that. I really believe that to be true.
Well, you've lived it, because this is a perfect time to point out the Morning Shakeout newsletter has been consistent for almost 10 years straight. Every week, you've put out, I know you just passed 500 recently, but every week you've put out a newsletter. It's coming up on 10 years pretty soon, correct?
Yeah, it'll be 10 years in November. But as of this conversation, I just put out issue 506.
Yeah.
What's today? Thursday, 2 days ago.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And every week. I just want to ask you about the newsletter a little bit,
Mhm.
while we're on it, because I've enjoyed it for a long time. It's some of your writings, links to other things that you've seen. How do you how do you choose what goes into your newsletter?
It's mostly a collection of things that I've been paying attention to. That's the shortest answer.
Mhm.
Things that I've read, things that I've listened to, things that I've watched, things that I'm thinking about, and I'll package them together every week. And it's an exercise for me as much as it is something for people to read every week, because it forces me to sit down on Mondays, which I do every week, and I go through all of these things that I've been thinking about, that I've been reading, that I've been watching, that I've been listening to, and I go through my notes that I take on these things when I read it for the first time, or I watch it for the first time, or I've just been sitting in my office thinking about something, and then I put it together into this newsletter, which is essentially a roundup of things that I've been paying attention to every week. And there are things that I will write longer about. A lot of things I'll just write a few sentences about, or I'll share a little excerpt from. And that's largely been what the newsletter is from day one in 2015 when I started it.
Yeah, and that was way before there were a ton. I mean, there's a lot of newsletters now, right? And there's Substack, which is great, and I enjoy it. But you were definitely ahead of the curve on getting that out.
Yeah, when I started the Morning Shakeout, email newsletters were not a new thing. They'd been around for a long time up to that point, but they weren't having the moment that they're having now. I mean, to send a newsletter like the one that I write to a pretty big audience, you can't just do that from your Gmail account. There's a limit on the number
Yeah.
of folks that you can add on there. So you have to use an email service provider. And at the time, there were, I would say, less than half a dozen good options, if that. And it was, oh man, I sent it on Mailchimp for years. They've been around for a long
Oh
time, and
yeah.
a lot of these email service providers were for marketing more than anything else. And I don't send a marketing newsletter, but that's really what was available. Substack didn't exist, Button Now didn't exist, Beehive didn't exist, Ghost didn't exist. It was really Mailchimp, Tiny Letter, which they eventually ended up buying, Constant Contact, and maybe
Hmm.
one or two
Hmm.
others. And I used Mailchimp for several years because it was free up to 2,000 subscribers. And I was like, well, there's no way that 2,000 people are going to sign up to get this newsletter. So I'll never have to pay for it. This is a great option for me. And I ended up eclipsing that within a year or two, and then did have to start paying for it.
Yeah.
But, then newsletters became more popular across the board, not just in running. And all these different platforms started coming out. Substack, Button Down, ConvertKit, Beehive, I mean, Ghost, you name it. They've all come out over the last, 5 to 6 years. But in 2015, newsletters were not as prevalent as they were now. And to rewind almost 10 years before that, I was really into blogging in the
Hmm.
early 2000s just for myself. I had a Blogspot account. I blogged on my own website for a little while. There was this small to medium sized network of running blogs at the time that I contributed to and I read religiously myself. And that's part of what I love about the network that Substack is built today. It feels like it has revived a lot of that, but I've always enjoyed that type of writing, that personal type of writing. Hey, here's my thoughts on this thing. I used to write about my training quite a bit, which now I mostly do on Strava, so I don't include that much of it in my newsletter anymore. But I would always share things that I was interested in on my blog. And then I stopped doing that more or less when I moved out to California or shortly before that, because I was focused on other things. And around, it was probably 2000, sometime in the 2014s, because I bought the Morning Shakeout URL in early 2014, I think it
Hmm.
was. And I knew I wanted to do something and I didn't know what form it was going to take. I was like, do I start another blog and call it the Morning Shakeout? Do I start an actual physical zine that I can print and maybe a few people will pay to have it shipped to them? Do I start a social media account called the Morning Shakeout? I ultimately decided on sending a newsletter, mostly because I knew that people spent a lot of time in their inbox and I wanted to reach people where they were. And working at Competitor on the web specifically, I saw where our traffic came from. And for a number of years, it came via social media referrals, specifically Facebook. And Facebook changed the algorithm, and that screwed things for a lot of publishers.
Hmm.
So, it started to show how unreliable social media could be. People's behavior changed as smartphones became a thing. You didn't visit websites directly anymore or as much as you used to in the past. I mean, when I started a Competitor, the homepage was a big deal. And that was a big deal for a lot of websites because most people would go to the competitor.com homepage or the New York Times.com homepage, whatever it is. And people can still do that today. But back in the early 2000s, that's how you found stuff on the internet, was by going to the homepage and sort of digging through things. And eventually it was social media referrals. And so when I was sitting on the idea for the Morning Shakeout, I thought a lot about where people spent their time. And I couldn't deny that most people were spending most of their time, for better or worse, in their inbox. And I certainly was as well. It's probably the first thing most people check every morning. They check it when they're bored. They check it at lunch. They check it before they go to bed.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to show up where people were already spending time. And I was like, well, newsletter just makes the most sense. And so how do I do that? And ultimately, I ended up starting to send it through MailChimp, and I've been sending it every week since late
Yeah.
November 2015.
That's very observant. Is that still the case? You think the inbox is where, I mean, obviously on the phone, I guess, and social media, but is it still applicable that the inbox is where people are?
Yes and no. I think so for folks around my age. I'm 43 years old. So I think if you're 35 and up, call it, or even 30 and up, you grew up with email and
Yeah.
it's probably a central part of your life and how you communicate with friends and family and where you get marketing email, confirmation of things, and you're still spending like quite a bit of time in your inbox. I don't know about the younger
Right.
generations, maybe not as much, but I feel like most people still need to have an email address.
Yeah.
But I mean, I've always known, and I knew this very early on, that the people who are going to read my newsletter are people kind of like me. So they're probably around the same age. They have an interest in running. They have an interest in how running connects with other areas of your life. And I still spend a lot of time on email. It's still my main form of digital communication, and I think it's the killer app. I mean, you go buy a phone and there's an email client pre-installed on there,
Yeah.
and it's easy enough to click with a button. And again, there's so many things that run through email and notifications that you get through email. I think the inbox, it's a very sacred space. I have a lot of respect for that. I mean, with the Morning Shakeout, I have always had this opt-in policy. People who want to read it, they can opt in and they can get it. And if you don't want to get it, I prefer that you opt out so that I'm not taking up space in your inbox,
Hmm.
because I think that is a sacred space and I don't want to be there unless you want me there and you want to invite me there. So email just felt right to me and it made the most sense. And I still think, again, for me and my demographic and the things that I'm interested in, it still makes the most sense. And I haven't seen email get as sullied as other areas of the internet. It still has not, for the most part, fallen victim to the algorithm. Google's done some things and other email clients with, inboxes and promotions and tabs, and that has in some instances created issues with newsletter delivery, but not that bad, quite honestly. But I still think email is the killer app, really,
Yeah.
and I have no plans to deviate from that
Yeah.
anytime soon.
Well, there's an element of control still. You can opt in, opt out, right? You get spam, you can flag it.
Well,
So
and the other thing for me is that it's a one-to-one relationship.
yeah.
So, I'm a pretty introverted guy, which surprises a lot of people when I tell them that. I love one-on-one interactions, conversations like this, like I have on my podcast in person, but the great thing about email, someone reads my newsletter and something resonates with them, or they have a follow-up question for me, or they maybe disagree with a take that I have, you can just hit reply and it comes directly to me,
Yeah.
and then we can engage in a back and forth exchange. And I have always, and this is again for me, like part of why I like the newsletter format and the email format. I always respond. I will reply to anyone who takes the time out of their day to write me. And if you do it in a disrespectful way, which honestly I can count on one hand the number of times it happened, I don't even need to. I won't
Yeah.
reply to you
Yeah.
if you're being mean and or you're anonymous. But 99.99% of the replies that I get, even if someone disagrees with me, they're respectful, they're civil, it's positive, and we end up having a great exchange. And I've had ongoing email exchanges with some of my readers who I've never met in person for almost 10 years now,
Really.
which is
That's
really cool.
that is really
Like I
cool.
feel like I have friends that I have not met on the other side of the world that have been reading my newsletter since the early days, and we've really gotten to know each other through this kind of constant stream of communication. That's what I love about it, because you can get to know someone in that way because it's one to one. Whereas on a social media platform, again, you're at the mercy of the algorithm, but it's like the comment sections are, I mean, for the most part, just a complete like mess, and
Yeah.
trying to like actually have a meaningful exchange with someone in the
Yeah.
comments isn't going to happen. But
Yeah.
you can have some really wonderful exchanges with people over email, and that's just something I really really cherish.
Well, and the thing I like about the morning shakeout too, and I always kind of look for this, is it's evolved, but you write about running, of course. You
Mhm.
write about things that are of interest to you. You'll put a link onto a music video or a song that resonated with you, and I don't know, it's just a window into who you are and what, gets you thinking about uh, something you may not have seen before. I like that part of it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And as I said earlier, it's really a roundup of things that I've been paying attention to, which is mostly running related things, if we're being honest, and
Uh-huh.
coaching related things and training related things and, parallels between running and life. But music is another one of my passions. I am not a musician myself. I can't sing. I don't play an instrument, but I've always loved music. It's always played a big role in my life. And I listen to a lot of it and I spend a lot of time with music, and I share things that I have personally found inspiring or interesting in the musical realm as well. And I get a surprising number of responses about my musical
Yeah. Well, because
recommendations that
music is
I
personal to
make.
people. It
It's
resonates, right?
personal and it's universal. And again,
Yes.
like a lot of the people who are reading my newsletter are kind of in or around the same age range. I mean, there's always outliers and such, but people who are around my age grew up with a lot of the same music and might have a lot of the same interest. And I I bring up a lot of older music, so it's nostalgic for people, and it's been fun again to have those exchanges. Someone just replies to me and just says, "Hey, I love that video that you shared," and then we can be like, "Hey, I saw them in concert like three
Yeah.
years
Yeah.
ago, and they really," and it's just I love that. I mean, that's been one of the most like gratifying aspects of this project over the past 10 years is those types of interactions, which I honestly didn't plan for again at the beginning, but in retrospect, I'm like, oh, this is part of what makes it such a fulfilling pursuit for me.
Well, and then last week in your newsletter, you were able to write a really nice piece about Ken Vigil, the
Joe
longtime,
V. Hill.
oh,
Yes.
I'm sorry, Joe Vigil. Yeah, I got the name wrong. Longtime running coach, died at the age of 95, Coach Dina Castor. And Dina was on the podcast and talked about him and his impact. And she writes about him extensively in her book. There's no
Mhm.
doubt he's a very was a very special person. What did he mean to you, and what did he mean to the running community?
So, for those who haven't read my newsletter, I shared a story about when I first met Joe Vigil, which was at the Olympic trials in Eugene, Oregon in 2012. And it was completely random at a Starbucks right outside the University of Oregon on one of the off days during the Olympic trials. And Joe Vigil didn't know me from the next person who walked through the door at Starbucks, but I knew who he was because I'm a running dork and I
Mhm.
read his book, Run to the Top. And he coached Dina Castor, Pat Porter, Adam State, Peter de la Cerda, like all these people that I had read about for years. And he created all of the USA track and field coaching certifications. His research in exercise physiology really changed the game for how we understand the actual training these days of running. So I mean, for all intents and purposes, he was a god in my eyes already. And I was like,
Mhm.
oh my God, he's just standing in line at Starbucks waiting to get a coffee. And I had been working at the Starbucks. I was writing training schedules. It was an off day from the competition, and I didn't want to bother him. I'm a pretty shy person. I was like, he's here with his athletes. He's getting a cup of coffee and he's probably going to get out of here. I don't want to bug him. And I left the Starbucks and I was second guessing myself as I walked out, and I was like, just go up and say thank you for all the work that he's
Mhm.
put out and leave it at that. And that's what I did. I went back in the Starbucks and I went up to him and I said, Coach Vigil, my name's Mario Fraioli. I'm a young coach. I just want to thank you for everything that you've done for the sport, the books that you've published, the articles that you've been a part of, the interviews that you've given, the camps. I've really taken a lot of value away from that. He thanked me for that, and he really appreciated it. And he asked me if I had any athletes at the meet, and I said no because I didn't. And he asked if he could buy me a cup of coffee. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. Like,
Yeah.
he wants to buy me a cup of coffee. He didn't know that I was just in there drinking a cup of coffee on my own. But I mean, am I going to say no to that? No way.
Yeah.
And yes, and we ended up sitting down for like 45 minutes. And he genuinely wanted to sit there with me, even though he had no idea who I was. And he was asking me about my background in running and who I was coaching. And I was coaching a guy named Cesar Lozano at the time from Costa Rica. And we were like, I think 8 or 9 weeks out from the Olympic marathon. And he's like, what do you have him doing right now? And I showed him the training plan and we're going through the train. I'm like, this is
Wow.
surreal. I'm
Yeah.
sitting here with like probably one of the greatest distance running coaches in history talking about this training plan that I've written out for my athlete who's preparing for a marathon in 8 weeks. And he ended up giving me his email address and told me to stay in touch. And I was just floored because here's a guy that I held in such high esteem. And whatever they say about don't meet your heroes, I was glad to have met my hero that day because he couldn't have been more approachable. I mean, the most approachable guy. Dina had a great line in the podcast that I did with her, which I felt was fitting. And she said, he's a guy who has no time at all, but he will give you all the time in the world, or something along
That's
those lines.
great.
And that was I mean, he's at the Olympic trials. He's got a handful of athletes at this meet,
Right.
and he's taken 45 minutes to sit down with some random kid, which I was at the time, who just went up and introduced himself, which really left an impression on me. And the last thing he said to me, because I offered to give him some money for the coffee and just the time. So I'm like, you're one of the best at the world at what you do. And you just gave me like 45 minutes of your time, which to me is really, really valuable. Let me compensate you for that. He just said, no, pay it forward. And that really stuck with me. And
Yeah.
that's something that in my own coaching, as younger coaches have approached me over the years, I've tried to mentor them, and I'll always answer any questions that people have, is really to pay it forward. And here's a guy, again, whose research has changed the game for how we understand running training. And if there were a Mount Rushmore of coaches, he would most definitely be on it. And he's paying it forward, and doing whatever he can to just help people. And he took a genuine interest in me. And he just has, I was talking about this to one of my friends earlier today. He just had this presence about him. He's not a big man. I mean, I'm 5'8". He was definitely no taller than me, probably a little bit shorter. He was
Mm.
not a distance runner himself. He's kind of a stockier guy. He played football and started coaching distance runners fairly early on, and that's, where his interest and his passion was. But he just has this presence about him, like this booming voice, and he would look at you, and you had his full attention when he was talking to you. And I was just captivated by it, and it was just this really surreal thing, and we ended up staying in touch, over the next several years. I would see him at Carlsbad 5000 or Olympic trials or other random events where we were both at, and he always remembered me, and he'd call me coach too, which still makes
Yeah,
the
that's
hair on the back of
great.
my neck stand up, and he'd be like,
That's
"Coach,
awesome.
how's it?" And I was like, "Man," I'm like, this is someone that I want to try and emulate as a coach. Like, I've got to do things my own way, but there's so much that I can and have learned from him, but that's the coach that I want to be. I want to be someone who cares about other people, who inspires them to think bigger than they think they can go. Because he did that for all his athletes, and he did that for me in a 45-minute conversation. Told me to go out and be great, told me I had the tools to do it. And to hear that from someone that you idolize, it's really, really powerful. And so that really stuck with me.
Well, and in reading Dina's book and hearing her talk about it, it's not just the X's and O's that he was about. It was about tying it into life lessons, motivations. Like, what are you getting out of it? And does that influence you and how you coach people?
Absolutely, 100%. And it was the same with Karen Bowen as well. So my
Right.
coach, Karen Bowen in college, who I spoke of earlier, she was an exercise scientist herself. She had all of the formal education, smart as a whip. Joe Vigil, PhD in exercise science, did so much research about training at altitude and what are the right intensities. And I mean, and you can watch him give those lectures online. They still exist on YouTube. You're not going to find anyone who knows the ins and outs of that better. But in the last hasn't even been a week since he passed away last Saturday, reading the tributes that people have had for him, athletes that he's coached, or even people that he's just influenced. Not one of them spoke about training or a workout or a number or any of that
Right.
stuff. It was about how much he cared about them as a person, how he instilled greatness in them, or this fire to chase greatness and become better than you were. And that's really what it's about. Like, he was someone who really used running as a vehicle to show you what was possible for you in your own life. And that, I mean, that's what it's about right there. And that's really how I will always remember him. I mean, for as brilliant as an exercise scientist as he was, and as much as he contributed to training theory, that's not what it is to be a good coach. It's about caring for the athlete, looking out for their best interests, showing them that they should aim quite a bit higher, and then just sitting next to them on the journey the entire
Yeah.
way and being a part of it. I mean, Dina hasn't been coached by Joe for, I mean, I think he formally retired. I think it was after 2004, so probably 20 years or
Mhm.
so. And even she commented how she still felt supported and was learning from him, even though he hasn't written a workout for her in 20 something years. And that's really what it's about. And I think that's why I wanted to become a coach, because I saw that in Karen Bowen, and I wanted to try and be that person. And I try to be that person for other people.
Yeah. Yeah, and think about the lives he's influenced and you too, I mean, through coaching. So those are the things that you give people. What do you get from coaching? What is the feeling that you get from whether it's an Olympian or someone that's trying to hit a 3:30 marathon and they hit it? What is it that you take from coaching?
It's that moment when someone has achieved something that they long set out to do. They paid their dues,
Mhm.
to use the name of this podcast, and it's paid off for them. Or they did something, and I experienced this myself as an athlete when I was in college under Karen Bowen. They did something that they didn't previously think was possible and surprise themselves in a way. And you helped them to realize that. And that's, selfishly, one of the best feelings in the entire world is just to see that glow, see that light bulb go off in someone when they've achieved this far off goal, or they've exceeded what they ever thought was possible. And again, to me, like that's intoxicating. Like that's a drug. I really enjoy helping people to do that, and it lights me up and it keeps me excited and inspired on a daily basis. And that's, I mean, I say to my wife all the time, like, I don't know that I'll ever retire from coaching. I might coach less people when I get older and my
Mhm.
capacities are, diminished in to some degree. But I feel like I'm always going to coach people because I I want to do that for as long as I can live. Like there's no better feeling in the world than to help someone else achieve something that they've set out to do or didn't think that they could do. And to be alongside them when they do that is an honor. It really is an honor and a privilege.
So you coach people, you work on your own from your own office, you do your writing, your business, self-contained business. Is it
Mhm.
is it ever lonely, if that makes sense, or do you have enough engagement with people? Just because I think about that, you're it's something of a little bit of solitude, and then there's these interactions.
Yeah, I have a lot of interactions primarily with my athletes every day.
Mm,
There's hardly ever a day when I'm not going back and forth with some number of people about their training, how they're feeling, adjusting their schedule, so on and so forth. So I have a lot of that. I never feel lonely, but
mhm,
I'm in my office right now. I like just being in my own space and having the actual space to just like think and do those things. And I feel like because of coaching and then over the years of working for myself, I've developed this like kind of informal network of other people who do similar things that I'm
mhm.
in touch with on a regular basis that I'll talk to on the phone, once a week. Like my friend Chris Corbin and I, we have a standing phone date every month and we'll catch up with one another. I have other friends I'll just call randomly kind of out of the blue and we'll catch up about things like that. Sometimes that happens over text, but no, I've again always wanted to sort of be in this situation where I can literally just be kind of in my own space and
Yeah,
have what are ultimately like virtual conversations over Zoom or telephone, whatever. But I also do a lot of that in person as well. I'll do with my local athletes in person meetups, whether it's on a run, which I'm doing tomorrow morning, or we meet up at a coffee shop, or I go to their race. So I never feel that myself, but I value solitude, so I've built my life to have that kind of like as a foundational piece for me, and then I can be as social as I need to be or want to be around that.
yeah. That's great. That makes a lot of sense. So I believe you wrote one book that was tied to the maybe the rock and roll
Rock and
marathon
roll
half marathon.
marathon
Yeah,
series,
so I
correct.
saw that book. Have you contemplated a book of whether it's a biography on someone else or you tying in? What have been the book publishing opportunities that you've looked at or thought about?
The short answer is yes, I've contemplated it, and that's about as far as I've gotten. I don't know. I know I have another book in me. I was kind of burned by the first book
Mm,
process, the official rock and roll guide to marathon and half marathon training, which I wrote when I was working as a senior editor at competitormagazine.com. And we were under the umbrella of the Competitor Group, which owned the rock and roll marathon series and owned Velo Press, which was the publishing company that put the book out. And I had this other idea for a book that I wanted to write that I went to Velo Press with. And they were like, that's a great idea. But we have this idea for a rock and roll branded training book that'll go with the series. And we
yeah,
think you'd be the perfect person to write it. Do you want to do that first? And then we can talk about your other book. And I was like, sure, you're going to literally hand me a book contract to write a training book. Sure, I'll do that. And I did it. And it was an awful process. I hated every minute of it.
yeah,
And I think I'm still scarred from that process to this day. But I definitely would like to write another book. And when I do, it will absolutely be self published because I want full control over the entire process. And I just don't know what that's going to be yet. I've certainly thought about it. I've had, a couple hundred podcast conversations that I've taken a lot from, and I could probably write a book based on those. I've had a lot of just experiences in my life as an athlete, as a coach, as someone who's worked in and around the running industry. That could potentially be a book. I've thought about this parallel that we've talked about with running and life and seeing if I could tie those two things together. I majored in philosophy in college, so it would sort of scratch that itch a little bit, but that's about as far as I've gotten. I
Yeah.
haven't
Well,
put down an
it's a
outline
huge
or
commitment, isn't it?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So we'll
Um,
see. At some
let,
point, it'll probably happen, but I don't know when.
well, the interest I think would be there because running, just continues to be so popular. And I was just reading that the London Marathon for 2026, right, has like 56,000 spots, and they've had 1.1 million applications for those spots. So, and it's not just London, but other marathons. What is it? What is it about running that's clicking this time around? Because we've had booms before.
I'm not entirely sure. I think it's multifactorial. So the majors in particular are having a moment. You
Yeah.
just mentioned London, Berlin is crazy popular. Chicago just tightened up their standards again. Boston continues to be really hard to get into, but even more local races are getting tougher to get into these days. I think some of it is just the accessibility of running. You really don't need much to get started. Sure, shoes are expensive, races aren't cheap, but I mean, you really just need a pair of shoes and have to have the desire and discipline to get out the door regularly, and you can do
Mhm.
it. You don't need to join a gym. Just head outside and start putting the miles in around your neighborhood. So, I mean, I think some of it is that. Some of it is I think technology because shoes have gotten better and that has certainly helped things from a performance perspective, which is a whole nother conversation.
Sure.
But because the shoes and equipment are better, I mean, running's still hard on the body, but it doesn't feel as bad. So I think it's made it a little more palatable for some people. There's
Mhm.
social pressure as well. I think people see things happening in their neighborhood and they're craving community. And I see that in the group that I coach here in San Francisco. I've been leading it for 10 years. We had maybe a dozen people back in 2016, and now we're 75 plus on a
Yeah.
Wednesday night at the
Yeah.
track. And it's not just our group. I mean, it's happening everywhere. So I think
Right.
people are craving that kind of community. I think people want to get out in the world more and do real things rather than spending their time behind a screen. But I do think the screens are driving some of it too, with the rise of influencers and people who are able to reach a wider audience that way. And some folks will see that and say, all right, well, this person's outside and they kind of look like me. And, maybe I can try that running thing and I'll give it a shot. So, there's some of that pressure as well, but I think it's multifactorial. I don't know that it's any one thing, but running, across the board is having a boom right now. Marathons, trail running's getting more and more
Yeah.
popular. People are showing increased interest in that. Fitness in general, I think High Rocks, the hybrid athlete, which is again, that's a whole nother kind of
Yeah.
conversation, has become pretty popular. I mean, I didn't know what a High Rocks event was till a few months ago.
Yeah.
And then I learned about it. I'm like, there's 10,000 people doing this
Yeah. They're
thing, or like
huge.
15,000 people doing this thing. I've never heard of it, but
Yeah.
they've become popular. So I do think like in general, people want to find ways to, challenge themselves with other people in like an actual real world environment. So probably some combination of all of that.
Well, if they want to read up on you and the Morning Shakeout newsletter, I know it's on Instagram, but where is that a website or what's the best way to track it? And I'll put the links in too.
Yeah, themorningshakeout.com is the website, and that's really the directory that will take you to all the different places. I host a newsletter on Substack now, so it's themorningshakeout.substack.com, and they make it super easy to sign up. Comes out every Tuesday and has for the last 506 weeks, and God willing, will come out for the next 506 weeks if I have my way. And that's probably the easiest way to keep up with all the different things that I'm doing because that's what I'm putting out most consistently. I'm not that active on social media anymore. I don't really post to Instagram, but the newsletter will show up in your inbox every Tuesday. And if it doesn't, come calling because that means something probably happened. But as long as I have something to say and share, that's where it'll show up.
That's great. We just mentioned your podcast, The Morning Shakeout, which I know you don't do as many episodes anymore, but you did that for a long time. And the beauty about that is a lot of those are timeless. Like, right? They're just like you can,
Yes.
if there's a runner you want to hear about or a subject you want to hear about, just go find it because there's so much good content there, and I've listened to many of them.
Well, thank you. I started the podcast in 2017. For a few years, I did it weekly along with the newsletter, and that cadence became unsustainable. But there's well over 200 conversations that I've had. Many of them are, an hour plus at this point, with athletes and coaches and people who are doing interesting things in running, and they're intentionally timeless. I mean, my main interest is not talking to people about the race that they ran last weekend or like like I want to hear their journey. I want to hear
Yeah.
how they got started, like what lights their fire, and what continues to kind of light their fire. And I feel very fortunate to have had some of the conversations that I've had through that podcast. And I do it about once a month at this point, and it's kind of a mix of some AMAs and some of those long form conversations that I've become known for. And my friend Simon Freeman and he's the editor in chief or no longer the editor in chief, co-founder and publisher of Like the Wind magazine. He and I have a
Mhm.
quarterly conversation about something topical. So it's coming out about once a month or when I have an interesting guest to talk to, but not as frequently as it was for a few years there.
Well, it's good stuff. And just like you, as a kid looking up running programs, it's much easier today. So you can do it through podcasts. You can do it
Oh
through
my goodness. Yeah.
all these links in the morning shakeout with all these
Embarrassment of
running stories.
riches. Yeah.
Yes. Just go find it.
It's really incredible.
Go
And
find it.
I continue to do that now. It's just, I have much more stuff to access and share. And I'm happy to do that every week in my newsletter.
Yeah. Well, thanks for being here. I've enjoyed the content you put out for a long time. So, real treat for me to get to talk to you and keep doing what you're doing because there's a great place for it.
Thanks so much for having me, Greg. I really appreciate it.